Commander Zixathara of the Galactic Council had seen many strange things in her 3 centuries of service. She had witnessed the crystalline cities of Vega Prime, negotiated with the gaseous beings of the Nebula Collective, and even survived a diplomatic dinner with the carnivorous Raptoid Empire. But nothing had prepared her for what she was experiencing at this small, unremarkable human service station on the outer rim of the Sol system. The humans called it Eddie's Stop and Go, and it was exactly the kind of primitive establishment that most civilized species avoided. The building was a simple rectangular structure made of some crude metal alloy, painted in garish colors that hurt her photosensitive eyes. Primitive wheeled vehicles sat around fuel dispensers that looked like they belonged in a museum. Yet here she was, along with 12 other high-ranking officials from across the galaxy, waiting in line behind a human wearing stained coveralls who was purchasing something called beef jerky. "This is ridiculous," muttered Ambassador Cleet through his translator device. His 4 arms gestured wildly in the way his species did when agitated. "We could be meeting at the crystal palaces of Andromeda or the floating cities of Titan. Instead, we're standing in this place that somehow serves the best food in 3 sectors," finished Admiral Voss, her mechanical voice carrying a hint of what might have been amusement. The cybernetic leader of the machine collective rarely showed emotion, which made her presence here even more puzzling. Zixathara watched the human behind the counter with growing fascination. Eddie, according to his name tag, appeared to be past middle age by human standards. His hair was gray and thinning, his face lined with wrinkles, and his uniform shirt had seen better days. Yet he moved with an efficiency that would have impressed a military quartermaster. He handled each customer's needs with quick, precise movements, remembering orders without writing them down, and somehow managing to keep up a friendly conversation with each person, despite the growing line of the galaxy's most powerful beings waiting behind them. "Next," Eddie called out, and Zixathara found herself stepping forward. The human looked up at her with the same easy smile he had given every other customer, seemingly unbothered by her blue-scaled skin, 4 eyes, or the fact that she commanded the largest space fleet in known history. "What can I get you today, miss?" Eddie asked, wiping his hands on a towel. Zixathara hesitated. She had come here because every leader in this line had insisted that this was where the most important business was conducted. Supreme Chancellor Mordak of the warrior clans had assured her that the decisions made at Eddie's carried more weight than anything passed in the formal halls of the Galactic Senate. Yet looking at this simple human, she couldn't understand why. I am not sure," she admitted. "I was told to come here for consultation." Eddie's smile widened. "Ah, you're one of those folks. Looking for answers, eh? Well, you've come to the right place. But first things first, you look hungry. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't processed or synthesized?" The question caught her off guard. As a military commander, she subsisted primarily on nutrition bars and protein supplements. The concept of eating for pleasure rather than pure sustenance was foreign to her species. "I do not understand the relevance of—" "Hold that thought," Eddie interrupted gently, already moving toward a large cooking surface behind the counter. "You're going to try my special. It's not on any menu, and I don't make it for just anyone. But something tells me you need it." Within minutes, the most incredible aroma Zixathara had ever experienced began filling the air. Her species had a highly developed sense of smell, used primarily for detecting danger or identifying prey. But this was something else entirely. The scent seemed to bypass her conscious mind and speak directly to some primal part of her brain that she didn't even know existed. Eddie worked without hurry, but also without waste. Every movement served a purpose. He flipped what appeared to be some kind of protein patty with one hand while seasoning vegetables with the other. Steam rose from various cooking surfaces, each carrying its own unique fragrance that somehow harmonized with the others. It was like watching a master conductor lead an orchestra, except instead of music, he was creating something that made her mouth water in ways she didn't know were possible. "Eddie!" called out a voice from behind her. Zixathara turned to see Chancellor Mordak himself, the 7-foot-tall warrior whose species had conquered half a dozen star systems through sheer ferocity. "Make sure she gets the full experience." "You know I will," Eddie replied without looking up from his cooking. "Though I'm still surprised you brought the whole gang this time. Usually you all come one at a time, pretending like it's some big secret." Zixathara glanced back at the line and realized that Eddie was right. These weren't random coincidences. Somehow, all of them had been drawn here deliberately. But by whom? And why? "There," Eddie said, sliding a plate across the counter. "One Eddie special, guaranteed to change your perspective on at least 3 major life decisions." The food looked nothing like any cuisine Zixathara had encountered in her travels. It appeared to be some kind of grilled protein surrounded by colorful vegetables and topped with a sauce that gleamed in the artificial light. Primitive utensils lay beside the plate, actual metal implements instead of the sonic food processors used by civilized species. She picked up what Eddie had called a fork and took a small bite. The explosion of flavors that hit her senses was unlike anything in her experience. It wasn't just the taste, though that was incredible enough. It was the texture, the temperature, the way different elements combined and separated on her tongue. But more than that, it was the feeling that came with it. A sense of comfort, satisfaction. She didn't have words for it in her own language. "Good?" Eddie asked, though his knowing smile suggested he already knew the answer. Zixathara found herself nodding as she took another bite, and then another. Around her, she was dimly aware of the other leaders watching with expressions ranging from amusement to understanding. They had all been here before. They all knew what she was experiencing. "How?" she managed to ask between bites. "How is this possible?" Eddie leaned against the counter, his expression growing more serious. "You want to know the real secret? It's not about the food. Don't get me wrong. I make a mean burger. But that's not why you're all here." "Then why?" Admiral Voss asked from somewhere behind her. "Because you're all so busy being important that you forgot what it feels like to be human," Eddie said simply. "Oh, I know most of you aren't actually human, but there's something inside every intelligent being that needs this. Needs to sit down, take a breath, and remember what it's like to just be." Zixathara set down her fork, the plate now empty. She felt different somehow. The constant tension that had lived in her shoulders for decades seemed to have eased. The endless stream of tactical calculations that usually occupied her mind had quieted. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt peaceful. "You see," Eddie continued, beginning to prepare food for the next customer in line, "all of you spend your time making decisions that affect billions of lives. You carry the weight of entire civilizations on your shoulders. But when's the last time any of you just sat and talked to someone who didn't want anything from you? When's the last time you did something just because it felt good, not because it served some greater strategic purpose?" Chancellor Mordak stepped forward, his massive frame somehow seeming less intimidating than usual. "Eddie speaks wisdom that our war councils cannot provide," he said to Zixathara. "I have conquered worlds, but I learned more about leadership in this small establishment than in all my military campaigns." "But how did you know?" Zixathara asked Eddie. "How did you know what I needed when I didn't even know myself?" Eddie shrugged as he handed a plate to Ambassador Cleet, whose 4 arms were already reaching for it eagerly. 40 years of running this place teaches you a few things about people. Doesn't matter if they're human, Klaxon, or something I've never seen before. Everyone needs the same basic things: good food, honest conversation, and a place where they can just be themselves for a while." As if to prove his point, Admiral Voss had somehow managed to modify her mechanical jaw to accommodate eating and was making soft humming sounds that Zixathera realized were expressions of pleasure. The sight of the galaxy's most feared artificial intelligence enjoying a simple meal was both surreal and oddly touching. "There's something else," Eddie said, lowering his voice as he worked. "You all know there's been talk of the Devourers returning." The peaceful atmosphere in the service station immediately grew tense. The Devourers were a nearly mythical threat, an ancient species that had supposedly consumed entire star systems before disappearing into the dark regions of space. Most officials considered them a legend, but recent deep space reconnaissance had detected disturbing energy signatures that matched historical records. "If they're really coming back," Eddie continued, "you're going to need to work together in ways you never have before. And you can't do that if you're all too proud or too stressed to actually trust each other." Zixathera looked around at her fellow leaders with new eyes. Here, sharing simple food and honest conversation, they didn't seem like the representatives of competing empires. They seemed like people, individuals with hopes and fears and the same basic needs that Eddie had identified. "Is that why you brought us all here together?" she asked. Eddie smiled that same easy smile. "I didn't bring anyone anywhere. You all came here on your own. I just provided a place where you could remember what you're really fighting to protect." As the afternoon wore on, something unprecedented happened. The most powerful beings in the galaxy found themselves sitting around the simple tables of Eddie's Stop and Go, talking not about trade agreements or territorial disputes, but about their lives, their dreams, and their fears about the future. Language barriers dissolved as universal translators carried not just words, but the emotions behind them. Ancient grievances seemed less important when shared over food that somehow tasted like home, even for species that had never been to Earth. Zixathera realized that Eddie was right. In all her years of command, she had forgotten what it meant to simply exist without the weight of her responsibilities. But more than that, she was beginning to understand why this unremarkable human service station had become the unofficial neutral ground of galactic politics. It wasn't about the location or even the food, though both were remarkable in their own way. It was about Eddie himself, and his unique ability to create a space where even the most powerful beings could remember their own humanity, whatever form that humanity might take. As the first day at Eddie's Stop and Go came to an end, Zixathera knew that everything was about to change, not just for her, but for the entire galaxy. And it had all started with a simple burger and the wisdom of a human who understood that sometimes the most important conversations happened not in palaces or council chambers, but over a shared meal in the most unexpected places. 3 weeks had passed since the unprecedented gathering at Eddie's Stop and Go, and Commander Zixathera found herself returning for the 4th time. She told herself it was for strategic reasons. The informal alliance that had begun forming around those simple tables was proving more effective than decades of formal diplomatic negotiations. But deep down, she knew the truth. She came back because Eddie's cooking made her feel something she had never experienced before: contentment. This time, she wasn't alone. Word had spread through the galactic community in ways that defied conventional communication networks. Not through official channels or diplomatic pouches, but through whispered conversations between starship crews and quiet recommendations shared between old friends. Eddie's Stop and Go was becoming something that had never existed before, a truly neutral meeting ground where species that had been enemies for millennia could sit side by side. The human establishment had expanded, though Eddie insisted on maintaining the same humble appearance. A few additional tables had been added outside, where beings who required different atmospheric conditions could dine under portable environment domes. The fuel pumps still served the primitive chemical-powered vehicles favored by humans, but now they were flanked by exotic energy charging stations for spacecraft that ran on antimatter, dark energy, and technologies that even the Galactic Council hadn't cataloged yet. "Morning, Commander," Eddie called out as Zixthera entered. He was training someone new, a young human female who moved with the same efficient grace that Eddie had perfected over decades. "This is my granddaughter, Sarah. She's learning the family business." Sarah looked up from the cooking surface, where she was preparing what appeared to be breakfast items for a group of early morning customers. Her smile carried the same warmth as Eddie's, but her eyes held a sharpness that reminded Zixthera of her own junior officers, intelligent, observant, and eager to prove themselves. "Pleasure to meet you, Commander," Sarah said, expertly flipping what humans called pancakes while simultaneously monitoring 3 other dishes. "Grandfather's told me so much about you. He says you're the one who figured out the logistics solution for the Centauri fuel shortage." Zixthera felt a flutter of surprise. That had been a minor conversation over coffee the previous week, hardly worth remembering. Yet Eddie had not only listened, but had apparently found it significant enough to share. "It was merely a suggestion," she said modestly. "A suggestion that saved my people from having to abandon 3 colony worlds," came a familiar voice. Zixthera turned to see Captain Rex Morrison, the human representative to the Galactic Council, settling into a nearby chair. His uniform was impeccably pressed, as always, but she noticed he had loosened his collar, a small sign of the relaxed atmosphere that Eddie somehow created. "Captain Morrison," she acknowledged. "I did not expect to see you here." Rex smiled and gestured to the plate in front of him, which held what appeared to be eggs, some kind of meat, and golden brown circles that Eddie had called toast. "Where else would I be? This place has become more important to galactic politics than the Senate chambers on Arcturus Prime." As if to prove his point, the door chimed and Ambassador Cleet entered, followed by Admiral Voss and 3 other beings Zixthera didn't immediately recognize. The artificial admiral's mechanical parts gleamed in the morning light, but she moved with less rigid precision than usual. Even the machine collective, it seemed, was learning to appreciate the human concept of leisure. "The usual, Admiral?" Sarah called out, apparently already familiar with the regular customers. "Please," Voss replied, her synthetic voice carrying tones that almost sounded pleased. "And perhaps you could show me again how you achieve that particular texture in the fried potato preparation. My analysis indicates it should be impossible given the equipment limitations." Eddie chuckled as he joined his granddaughter at the cooking station. "Some things can't be analyzed, Admiral. Sometimes you just have to feel your way through it." "An inefficient methodology," Voss observed, but she said it with what might have been fondness rather than criticism. Zixthera settled into her usual spot, a table by the window that gave her a clear view of both the interior and the approach routes outside. Old military habits died hard, even in the most peaceful settings. Sarah appeared beside her with a steaming cup of what Eddie called coffee, a bitter human beverage that had somehow become essential to her morning routine. "You know," Sarah said, sitting down across from her, "I've been thinking about something Grandfather said yesterday." "Oh?" Zixthera sipped her coffee and waited. She had learned that humans often shared their most important insights through casual conversation. "He told me that when he first opened this place 40 years ago, he never expected anyone but local truckers and travelers to stop by. Then one day, about 15 years ago, this strange ship landed in the parking lot." Zixthera set down her cup, suddenly more alert. "What kind of ship?" "He said it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Not human, obviously, but not like any of the designs he'd studied in school either. Old, but well-maintained. The being who came out was injured, exhausted, and carrying something that looked incredibly important." "Who was it?" Sarah's expression grew more serious. Someone calling himself the Keeper. He spoke perfect English, knew things about Earth that weren't in any public databases, and he was running from something. Something that scared him more than anything Grandfather had ever seen. Around them, the normal breakfast conversations continued, but Zix Thara felt a chill that had nothing to do with her cold coffee. What did he want? Safety. A place to hide. And he offered to pay not with money but with information. Sarah glanced around to make sure no one was listening too closely. He told Grandfather that this location, this exact spot, sits on something called a convergence point, a place where the normal rules of space-time are flexible. The implications of that statement hit Zix Thara like a plasma blast. Convergence points were theoretical constructs, mathematical possibilities that most scientists dismissed as pure fantasy. But if they were real, if Eddie's stop-and-go sat on one of them, it would explain so much. The way news traveled here faster than it should, the sense of peace that seemed to emanate from the location itself, the fact that beings from across the galaxy felt drawn to this one small human establishment. "What happened to this keeper?" she asked. "He stayed for 3 days, ate more food than seemed possible for someone his size. Grandfather said he seemed to be healing from something that went deeper than just physical wounds, and when he left, he gave Grandfather a gift." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out something that made Zix Thara's breath catch. It was a small device, no larger than a human hand, but it pulsed with energy patterns that her trained eye immediately recognized as being far beyond any known technology. "He called it a harmony inducer," Sarah continued. "Said it would ensure that anyone who came here with peaceful intentions would find what they needed. But those who came with violence in their hearts would find themselves discouraged from staying long." Zix Thara thought about all the times she had witnessed potential conflicts diffuse themselves at Eddie's. Heated arguments that suddenly cooled when the participants sat down to eat. Ancient enemies who found themselves laughing together over shared stories. She had attributed it to Eddie's natural charisma and the relaxed atmosphere, but perhaps there had been something more at work. "Sarah," Eddie's voice called from behind the counter, "why don't you show the commander the message?" The young woman nodded and activated a control on the small device. Suddenly, the air above their table shimmered, and a three-dimensional image appeared. It showed a being unlike any Zix Thara had encountered. Tall, ethereal, with features that seemed to shift depending on the viewing angle. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies she could feel as much as hear. "If you are seeing this message," the Keeper said, "it means that the convergence point has begun to fulfill its purpose. You who gather in this place of simple nourishment and honest fellowship, know that you have been chosen not by fate, but by your own choices to seek something better than the conflicts that have defined your histories." The image paused, and for a moment, Zix Thara felt as though the being was looking directly at her. The darkness approaches. The devourers stir in the deep void, and their hunger has grown beyond what it was when last they threatened your galaxy. But you have something they do not expect, unity born not of desperation, but of genuine understanding. The bonds you forge over shared meals and honest conversation will prove stronger than any military alliance. The message continued, but Zix Thara found herself thinking about the past weeks. The casual conversations that had led to breakthrough solutions for problems that had stumped official committees for years. The way Chancellor Mordak had shared tactical knowledge with Admiral Voss, two beings whose species had been enemies since first contact. The growing network of communication and cooperation that was spreading outward from this small human establishment. "There is one more thing you must know," the Keeper's message continued. "The human called Eddie is not merely the proprietor of this establishment. He is a guardian, chosen by qualities that your sciences cannot measure, but your hearts recognize. His gift is not supernatural, but it is special. The ability to see past differences to the common needs that unite all thinking beings. The image began to fade, but the keeper's final words rang clear. Trust in each other. Trust in the simple wisdom of shared nourishment and honest fellowship. And when the darkness comes, remember that the greatest weapon against despair is hope. And the greatest source of hope is the knowledge that you are not alone. As the hologram disappeared, the morning sounds of the restaurant returned. The sizzle of cooking food, the quiet conversations, the gentle hum of the coffee machine. But everything felt different now, more significant, more purposeful. "How long have you known?" Zixthara asked Eddie, who had appeared beside their table with a plate of his breakfast special. "About the keeper? Since the day he left? About what this place was becoming?" "I think I've known for a while, but I didn't want to admit it to myself." Eddie set the plate down and looked around at his customers. Beings from dozens of different worlds, all sharing the same space in peace. "I just wanted to serve good food and treat people right." "Seems like that was enough." "More than enough," Admiral Voss interjected from her nearby table. "Eddie Morrison, you have accomplished something that our most advanced diplomatic protocols could not achieve. You have created genuine friendship between species that have known only conflict." Eddie's weathered face reddened slightly. "I don't know about that. I just treat folks like folks, you know. Doesn't matter what they look like or where they're from. Everyone's got to eat, everyone wants to be heard, and everyone deserves a little kindness." As simple as those words were, Zixthara realized they contained a wisdom that had eluded the greatest philosophers and military strategists in galactic history. The solution to millennium-old conflicts hadn't been found in weapons or treaties, but in the basic recognition of shared humanity, whatever form that humanity might take. Outside the windows of Eddie's Stop and Go, spacecraft from a dozen different civilizations sat side by side in the expanded parking area. Their crews were inside, sharing breakfast and conversation, building relationships that were already beginning to reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. And somewhere in the deep void, ancient evils stirred, unaware that their greatest threat wouldn't come from armies or weapons, but from the simple power of beings who had learned to see each other not as aliens, but as friends. The alarm klaxons wailed across every major communication network in the galaxy. After centuries of dormancy, the Devourers had returned, their massive bioships emerging from the dark void like nightmares made manifest. Their advance fleet alone was larger than the combined military forces of the Galactic Council, and reconnaissance reports indicated that this was merely the vanguard of something far worse. Commander Zixthara stood in the emergency command center aboard the flagship of the combined galactic fleet, watching tactical displays that painted an increasingly grim picture. The Devourers moved through space like a plague, consuming entire star systems and leaving nothing but empty void behind. Their bioships were living creatures the size of moons, capable of devouring both matter and energy, growing stronger with each system they consumed. "Our simulation models show complete galactic consumption within 18 months, reported her tactical officer, his usually steady voice betraying an edge of fear. "No known weapon system can penetrate their bio-armor, and they adapt to each attack strategy within hours." "What about the unified defense plan?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be unsatisfactory. "The logistics alone are staggering," Admiral Voss interjected over the communication system. Her mechanical precision was more evident now, stress overriding the more relaxed patterns she had adopted during their time at Eddie's. "Coordinating the military doctrines, communication protocols, and supply chains of 47 different species would take months under optimal conditions." "Months we do not have," growled Chancellor Mordak from his position commanding the warrior fleet. My scouts report the advance force will reach the outer colonies within days. Zixthara felt the familiar weight of impossible responsibility settling on her shoulders. In the past, she would have shouldered this burden alone, making the hard decisions that would save some while sacrificing others. But something had changed during those mornings at Eddie's Stop and Go. She found herself thinking not about acceptable losses, but about the beings she had come to know as individuals rather than statistics. There might be another way, she said quietly. The command center fell silent. Dozens of the galaxy's most experienced military minds waited for her to continue. We don't need months to coordinate our forces, she said, her voice gaining strength. We need Eddie. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Several species representatives began talking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of doubt and confusion. The idea of bringing a single human civilian into the greatest military crisis in galactic history seemed absurd to minds trained in traditional strategic thinking. "Commander," Admiral Voss said, her synthetic voice cutting through the noise, "while I have great respect for Eddie Morrison's unique talents, I fail to see how restaurant management skills apply to military coordination." "Think about what he's already accomplished," Zixthara replied, activating the main display to show a schematic of the galactic region around Eddie's Stop and Go. "In less than 6 months, he's facilitated more genuine cooperation between our species than the Galactic Council achieved in its entire history. The trade agreements, the technology exchanges, the cultural understanding programs, they all started over breakfast conversations at his restaurant." Chancellor Mordak's image appeared on the main screen, his scarred features thoughtful despite the urgency of the situation. "The commander speaks truth. My warriors have learned tactics from Admiral Voss's machines, shared knowledge that my people guarded for generations. This happened not through formal negotiation, but because Eddie created an environment where such sharing felt natural." "More than that," added Ambassador Cleet, his 4 arms gesturing emphatically. "He has the Keeper's device. If the convergence point can facilitate communication and understanding between a few dozen beings, perhaps it can be enhanced to coordinate entire fleets." The idea was audacious, unprecedented, and almost certainly impossible by any conventional measure. It was also, Zixthara realized, exactly the kind of thinking that Eddie himself would employ, looking beyond traditional solutions to find possibilities that others couldn't see. "The risk is enormous," she admitted. "We would be betting everything on an untested theory based on the wisdom of a human short-order cook, as opposed to betting everything on conventional tactics that have never faced an enemy like this," Admiral Voss asked. "Eddie Morrison has already proven capable of achieving the impossible. Perhaps it is time to trust in that capability completely." The debate that followed was brief but intense. Military protocol warred with desperate hope. Conventional wisdom clashed with the evidence of their own experiences. In the end, it was the memory of shared meals and honest conversation that tipped the balance. Within hours, the most powerful fleet in galactic history was converging on Eddie's Stop and Go. Massive dreadnoughts designed for planetary bombardment took positions alongside elegant exploration vessels, and converted cargo haulers pressed into military service. The small human establishment found itself at the center of a defensive formation that stretched across several light hours of space. Eddie stood in his restaurant, looking out at the impossible sight of hundreds of spacecraft from dozens of different civilizations, all waiting for guidance from a man whose greatest ambition had been to serve good food and treat people right. Sarah stood beside him, the Keeper's device in her hands, its energy patterns more active than they had ever seen. "Grandfather," she said quietly, "are you sure about this?" Eddie smiled the same easy smile he had given to every customer who had ever walked through his doors. "Honey, I've been sure about exactly 3 things in my entire life. Your grandmother was the best person I'd ever meet. Good food makes everything better, and people are basically decent if you give them a chance to be. He turned to face the assembled representatives who had crowded into his restaurant. Commander Zixathara sat at her usual table, but now she was flanked by the holographic projections of fleet commanders from across the galaxy. Admiral Voss had somehow managed to create a physical avatar to join them in person. Chancellor Mordak's massive frame took up most of the back corner, while Ambassador Cleet occupied a specially reinforced booth designed to accommodate his species' unique physiology. Sarah's been working with some of your technical folks, Eddie continued, and they think they can use the Keeper's device to create a kind of network. Link all your ships and commanders through the same kind of harmony field that's been working here. The theory is sound, Admiral Voss reported. By amplifying the convergence point's natural properties and broadcasting them through our communication arrays, we could create a form of shared consciousness that would allow unprecedented coordination without sacrificing individual autonomy. In simpler terms, Sarah added, you'd all be able to work together like you do here, but on a scale large enough to command entire fleets as if they were single organisms. The plan they outlined over the next few hours was unlike anything in military history. Rather than traditional command hierarchies, each fleet would maintain its autonomy while sharing tactical awareness and strategic thinking through the enhanced harmony field. Decisions would emerge from collective insight rather than top-down orders. It was either revolutionary or suicidal, depending on one's perspective. There's one more thing, Eddie said as the technical preparations neared completion. This only works if you trust each other completely. The harmony field amplifies what's already in your hearts. If there's doubt, fear, or hidden agendas, those get amplified too. He looked around at the assembled leaders. These beings who had once been strangers and enemies, now united by shared meals and genuine friendship. But I think we've already proven that trust is possible, haven't we? The first test came sooner than expected. Devourer scouts appeared at the edge of the system, their bioships pulsing with malevolent energy as they probed the defensive formations. Traditional military doctrine would have called for a cautious response, feeling out enemy capabilities while maintaining defensive positions. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The harmony field activated, and suddenly every commander in the Allied fleet could feel what their colleagues were thinking. Not mind-reading, but something deeper. Shared intuition, collective instinct, unified purpose. Commander Zixathara found herself seeing the battlefield not just through her own tactical training, but through Chancellor Mordak's warrior instincts, Admiral Voss's computational precision, and Eddie's simple understanding that sometimes the best solution was the most direct one. The response was instantaneous and devastating. 47 different species, each with their own military traditions and technological advantages, moved as a single organism. Klaxon plasma cannons provided covering fire for machine collective interceptors, while human missile boats coordinated with Centauri energy shields to create kill zones that the Devourer scouts couldn't adapt to quickly enough. But the real victory wasn't tactical, it was strategic. For the first time in recorded history, the Devourer's advanced scouts retreated. Not because they were physically damaged beyond repair, but because they encountered something their ancient programming couldn't process, unity born of genuine understanding rather than desperate necessity. By the 7 suns, Chancellor Mordak breathed, his voice carrying across the harmony field to every commander in the fleet. Did you feel that? When they realized we weren't just allied but truly united, they actually hesitated. Their attack patterns are based on exploiting divisions between defending species, Admiral Voss confirmed. They expect betrayal, competition for resources, sacrificial strategies. What they found instead was cooperation so complete it registered as a new type of intelligent life. Eddie nodded from his position at the center of the harmony field, somehow managing to coordinate the communication of hundreds of beings while simultaneously preparing sandwiches for the skeleton crew maintaining the restaurant. "That's the thing about bullies," he said conversationally. "They count on their victims being afraid and alone. Take that away, and they don't know what to do." The main Devourer fleet arrived 3 days later, a horror of biomechanical nightmares that had consumed 1,000 civilizations. They came expecting to face desperate defenders fighting for lost causes, species that would turn on each other when survival was at stake. What they found instead was something that had never existed in all their eons of predation, a truly united galaxy. Not united by treaty or conquest, but by genuine friendship forged over shared meals and honest conversation. Ships that should have been enemies fought side by side with perfect coordination. Technologies that had been jealously guarded secrets were freely shared. Tactical knowledge passed instantly through the harmony field, creating adaptive strategies that matched the Devourer's own evolution in real time. The battle itself was fierce but brief. The Devourers had grown accustomed to feeding on fear and division. Faced with unity backed by genuine care for one another, their bioships began to change. The malevolent energy that powered their consumption drives wavered as the harmony field extended outward, touching even their ancient consciousnesses with something they had forgotten existed: the possibility of connection rather than consumption. When the last Devourer bioship powered down its weapons and sent a communication requesting terms for peaceful coexistence, Eddie was in his kitchen, making coffee for the beings who had just saved the galaxy. His hands were steady as he worked, and his smile was the same one he had given to every customer who had ever entered his establishment. "Well," he said to Sarah, who was documenting everything for what would undoubtedly become the most important historical record in galactic civilization, "I guess that proves it. Good food really does make everything better." Outside, hundreds of spacecraft from dozens of worlds maintained their protective formation around the small human service station that had become the most important location in the galaxy, not because of its strategic position or defensive capabilities, but because it was where beings had learned to see beyond their differences to the common needs that united them all. The Devourers would eventually be integrated into galactic society, their ancient hunger transformed into a drive to nurture rather than consume. The unity forged in battle would lead to an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. And at the center of it all would remain Eddie's Stop and Go, where the most important decisions in the galaxy would continue to be made over good food and honest conversation. Eddie Morrison had set out to run a simple service station. In the end, he had served something far more important. He had served unity itself, one meal at a time.